everyone, and welcome to SunUp. I'm Lyndall Stout. The forecast tells us some of the coldest temperatures of the season are likely headed our way. Today we want to talk about how those frigid temperatures impact our cattle herd and what you can do to help keep them safe. Here's SunUp's Curtis Hare and one of our extension beef cattle specialists, Dr. Paul Beck.
Well, the only thing that's consistent about the Oklahoma weather is its inconsistency. So, Paul, when the weather changes rapidly like this in this time of year, what does that mean for Oklahoma cattle producers?
Yeah, Oklahoma's weather is just really variable this time of year, and it just seems like Groundhog Day again. With the storms that we've had going through, this fall and on through the winter, broken up by some pretty nice weather. So when we've got some really nice days going in a row, and cows start losing their acclimation to the cold winter, and when we've got cows like the ones behind us here that are in good body condition with good thick winter hair coats, it's not going to be as stressful on them when we look at their lower critical temperature. It's going to be down in the 20s. With the wind chill we're expecting this weekend, it's going to, that lower critical temperature and that wind chill will be down below that. But a cow in this kind of condition will be able to weather that fairly well. It's those thin cows that will really be at more risk. A cow in a good body condition with a good thick winter hair coat will have lower critical temperature of about 32. Thinner cow with less internal insulation, it's going to be around 40. The other thing to be concerned about will be newborn calves. And when we have a storm front move through, we're going to have a lot of calves be born.
So with those newborn calves that are going to be born, when it's, not just a weather event like this, but just in, weather that's going to be really low temperatures, what are some things that producers can keep in mind so they don't lose any of those calves?
These baby calves, newborns, have very thin skin. They're born with brown adipose tissue that they use for energy until they get up and suckle. And when they start shivering, they can burn through that brown adipose tissue really quickly. And whenever they lose that, that's when those calves will starve to death very rapidly. So you need to, really watch, cows that are expecting. And if that calf doesn't get up and suckle, or if he's born out exposed into the elements, you need to get him moved in to shelter, make sure he gets up and suckles. And if you find a calf that's, having hypothermia or low body temperatures, you need to get him into the pickup, and if it's really serious, bring him into the house and put him in the bathtub in some hot water. And, I always, tell producers, if you have kids or grandkids, you make sure they get in there with that calf and see it in that bathtub in your house, because they'll always remember it.
So in regards, like when these events come along, how do they impact an animal's, a cow's food and water intake?
So in general, when we get below that lower critical temperature and start getting into cold stress, cows will actually increase consumption to increase their basal metabolic rates and increase the heat of fermentation. But what happens when we have an acute storm like this, where it really blows in quickly, they actually will have about 50% cut in forage intake. Their grazing behavior changes, their water intake changes. So, along with increasing their requirements for maintenance by, with a storm like this, if we get down to wind chills of down to around 3, we're looking at about a 30% to 40% increase in nutrient requirements. Having some real good high quality hay close to a shelter area, just having windbreaks available, or, we always cuss those cedar trees and we talk about how to eradicate them or burn to get rid of them. But this is the event where having a good, group of cedar trees to break the wind for them cows to get behind will really pay some benefits.
Well, thanks, Paul. Paul Beck, Extension Beef Cattle Specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
In the previous two cow-calf corners, we've talked about the first two of the three stages of calving. Remember, stage one was what took place before the cow actually went into labor, and the key thing that happens there is cervical dilation. Stage two is where all the action is. That begins when we first see the appearance of the water bag or the baby calf's feet, and stage two is over when the baby calf is born and completely out on the ground. Stage three is what we want to visit about today. The stage three of calving is the actual release of the placental membranes, the afterbirth. Some ranchers call it the cleaning of the cow. That should take place within about 8 to 12 hours after the calf is born. If in fact the cow hasn't released these membranes or the afterbirth after 12 hours, it's considered a retained placenta. Now, I think we want to be careful about going and getting too aggressive just because she hasn't cleaned in that first 12 hours. Quite frankly, if that's the case, my suggestion is that you watch the cow closely for several days to make sure that she shows no signs of sickness. You want to watch for that cow that might have droopy ears, is lethargic, loses appetite, or if you actually get her up and check her temperature, she has an elevated temperature indicating a fever. In that case, there is an infection setting up, and we need to visit with our local veterinarian just as soon as possible to see what treatments are going to be designed for that cow with that retained afterbirth. What we don't want to do, and I want to really emphasize this point, because years ago it was commonplace to manually remove that retained placenta, and research since then has shown us very clearly, and veterinarians are pretty much all in agreement, that manually removing of that afterbirth can do more damage than it does good. So we want to just continue to watch that cow very, very closely, the one that has that retained afterbirth, and at the first of any signs of sickness, then we want to contact our local veterinarian, visit with he or she about what treatment they would recommend, and then start that so that this cow is not caught in a situation where she ends up with an infection in the uterus and can affect her later reproduction. Keep that in mind as you go through this calving season, and we look forward to visiting with you again next week on Sunup's Cow-Calf Corner.
Dr. Dave Wellman, our extension beef cattle specialist, joins us now to look at the hay supply scenario this winter. It really kind of depends on where you are, and this is really an issue every winter.
It is, and there's likely a real shortage out, west into New Mexico and, west and north of Oklahoma. The drought monitor map shows a lot of red and brown. So I think it'd be a good time to remind people, right in the middle of the hay feeding season, whether you're, have hay shortage or the price is going up or not. You don't want to spend all that money producing that crop and putting up nice quality hay and then just go out there and waste it. You can waste as much as 21% of the original bell weight, just depending on the type of feeder you choose.
Let's talk about some of the ways to feed hay in general. There's lots of different ways. There's not necessarily a right or wrong. It's kind of producer preference, right?
Yeah, very much so. And yeah, it depends on the resources you've got. Tractor, a pickup with the, Dewey's or something on the back. But one of the options is to roll hay out. So you're going to take some piece of equipment and roll it out and sort of recreate that windrow. There are a couple of publications that suggest that if you roll too much hay out, it's going to turn into bedding. And so you waste a substantial amount, up to 25%. So, rolling hay out is not going to work very well in a situation where you need to interval feed, meaning you can only feed them every 3 days or once a week or something like that. So, our recommendation and the literature points out that if you limit the amount and feed it more frequently, hay waste, when you roll it out like that, can be as low as about 5%. But you have to limit the amount they get and feed it more frequently, meaning daily or every other day.
Another option, of course, is a feeder. There's lots of different types, and you and your teams over the years have done research on feeders.
We have, and you know, we've studied several different types of feeders. This one is just a good example of an efficient hay feeder. One would be the solid ring around the bottom. That does help hold some hay in. The other is some sort of a basket mechanism to sort of hold the hay for a longer period of time while the cattle are eating around the outside. It holds it toward the middle of the feeder longer, and so it's not out close to the edge where the cattle can pull it out, drop it on the ground, and step on it. The third feature that we think makes a feeder like this more efficient is the fact that, you know, these bars on top are relatively close together, and the cattle can't pull a lot of hay right here next to the outside, a long distance to the quote bunk down there at the bottom, and so the wind would blow a lot of hay around the outside here. So some feature like that seems to be helpful also.
You and the Beef Extension team talk about hay and a lot of other topics on your website, and then you all are also resuming that Thursday Ranchers Lunchtime series.
Yes. Yeah, so beef.okstate.edu. Some of those lunchtime series deal with, you know, management of hay, how to stack your hay and so on, and have been really popular. Dr. Rosalind Biggs is heading up this next series, and the topic there is the fundamentals of the cattle show industry, and we think it's going to be really good and very popular.
Great. Well, we look forward to checking it out. Dave, good to see you. And for links to the Ranchers Lunchtime series and a lot of other information, go to sunup.okstate.edu.
Welcome to the Mesonet Weather Report. I'm Wes Lee. By now, you have probably heard that the strongest Arctic front of the year is expected to arrive later in the weekend. Cattle exposed to these colder temperatures will require some extra attention to help them cope with the added stress. This map is the Oklahoma Cattle Comfort Index. This index utilizes temperature, wind speed, humidity, and sunlight to come up with a number that symbolizes how cattle might feel. By the end of the weekend, it is likely the index will plunge into the cold danger range. This human wind chill map is one of the model forecasts for midnight Sunday morning. It probably won't be exact, but it indicates cold air is coming. It is expected to stay very cold for a large part of next week. The dark blue colors on this forecast map indicates a high probability of colder than normal temperature. A rule of thumb for feeding cows in cold weather is to increase feed by 1% each degree that Cattle Comfort Index is below 32 with a dry hair coat. Now here's Gary focusing on the moisture situation.
Thanks, Wes, and good morning, everyone. Well, we're finding out right about now that we're still in winter. It's not done with us. We're still in that cooler, drier part of the year. How's that affected the drought monitor? Let's take a look. Well, we still have that little nagging extreme drought down in far southwestern Oklahoma around Harmon, Jackson, and Greer County. So we hope to get some of that out of there with some upcoming moisture. And then we have the larger surrounding area of moderate to severe drought. And then, of course, the western panhandle still mired in that severe to moderate drought. No drought in south central Oklahoma or southeast Oklahoma, which again is a welcome change from the last few months. How have we done with rainfall so far in 2021? Well, let's take a look at the Mesonet maps for the first 5 weeks of the year or so. We do see that northeastern and southeastern Oklahoma, as usual, have the lion's share of the moisture in the state with 3 to 4 inches, as much as 5 inches in some areas. We do have a streak down into southwestern and west central Oklahoma, through central Oklahoma of 1 to 2 inches, and then the rest of us probably less than an inch or so. So it's a little bit hit and miss with the moisture. We can tell that a little better when we go to the departure from normal rainfall map for the same time frame. Again, that streak from west central up through central into north central Oklahoma about an inch above normal. Then we get up to 2 to as much as 4 inches above normal up in northeastern, north central parts of Oklahoma. And then deficits of about an inch in other areas, a little bit less in the Oklahoma Panhandle. As we look into later next week, we do see increased odds of above normal precipitation in this outlook from the Climate Prediction Center, at least across the eastern 4/5 or so of the state. So northwestern Oklahoma, far west central, and the Panhandle. A little bit out of luck on this map, but of course these are fuzzy lines, so we shouldn't take that into be strict boundaries where those increased odds end. That's it for this time. We'll see you next time on the Mesonet Weather Report.
Doesn't seem like we get to say it a whole lot, but Kim, commodity prices are looking pretty okay this time of year. Does China and the big purchase last week, does that have anything to do with it?
I think it does, and that purchase of the highest corn purchase since 1991 has something to do with it. But there's more than that. You got to look at is why are they purchasing that? Now China's purchasing corn because they've got their African swine flu problem pretty much solved. They're building their hog stock. They got to have corn to feed that. But there's some other reasons back behind that. Countries are building their stocks. They're increasing stocks and redundancy, because one thing world leaders know: if they don't feed their people, if food's not there, then they're going to have problems in their society. So and with COVID, the transportation system was disrupted, and they are afraid that if that continues and that disruption's there, then they won't have food and product for their citizens, and the citizens will rebel on that, and then they will lose power and they'll upset their economies and stuff. So there's a lot going on out there right now, why we have higher prices.
How long do you think those high prices will stick around?
How long is this philosophy of maintaining additional stocks going to last? Yeah. If that was to change, we're going to go back to where we are, because we've got production going on, but China's demand, as China's economy grows, their food use grows, they go to a better diet, they've got to have more protein, more corn, more wheat, and that demand increases. China was determined to be self-sufficient in corn, and they were for several years. Right. But now they've got to import about 25% of their corn needs because of the increased demand from their consumers.
A lot of producers were talking about sorghum last year, and then there was also the corn and the soybeans being planted. Is this a good year to kind of look at adjusting the planted acres for those three?
That's sorghum. You know, sorghum is $3.90 above last year's price because of China buying sorghum. Right. Will that continue? If that continues, switch from corn to sorghum. Or if you can raise sorghum, I'd probably switch. But the higher prices, I think, give our producers more choices on how to use their land, labor, capital, and management. And these higher prices, and I think they're going to last another year or two, it's going to give our farmers the opportunity to earn some profit.
Whenever this wheat actually comes to maturity, where are we with the prices?
Well, we're around $6 a bushel, and that's relatively good. Is it good as 7 or 8? No, and we've been there, and we could go there. You get some short crops around the world with the U.S. stocks tightening up, with Russia putting on their export tax, with Argentina's export tax, with things going on around the world. You could tighten up the supply of wheat a little bit with the loss of a crop and the demand there. So we could see $7 wheat. If the philosophy changes and we have big crops coming on this next year, I think it will be out August, September, October before prices break down really far. But we could see wheat prices $1 lower. As
long as things should be good, as long as we keep that timely rainfall that we love to get in Oklahoma.
Well, in that our crop, the U.S. crop, is the next one to come online that's exportable. I think those prices will hold for the 2021 crop. However, they may break in that September, October, November time period, depending on world production.
My, what a difference a year makes. Dr. Kim Anderson, Grain Marketing Specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
Dr. Rosalind Biggs, our Extension Beef Cattle Specialist, joins us now to talk about an important topic, animal disease traceability. Give us an idea of what this entails.
Well, animal disease traceability, the principles now we're probably a little more familiar with after having gone through almost a year in the COVID pandemic. But the basic understanding of it is where an animal would have been exposed to a certain disease, whether that be a foreign animal disease or what we call an endemic disease, which is a disease we have here in the United States. Once they are infected, what other animals would they have potentially exposed, and where could it have gone from there?
And veterinarians and government agencies get right to work if something happens, right?
Absolutely. Our veterinarians in private practice are absolutely on the front lines, and so it's a cooperative effort between the two groups to make sure that our national herd stays healthy.
What else is involved in traceability? Just in general, there's a few things just to keep in mind.
Well, certainly records are critical, and I think at a basic level, each producer needs to evaluate their record keeping ability, because are you to be involved in a disease outbreak or a trace effort, then you need to be able to say, this animal is here, they arrived at this time, they were here for this period of the year, and this is where they traveled to after that.
What is the current process for IDing livestock?
We've had a long-term history in the United States of identification, and most producers will be familiar with, again, those metal tags that have been used for some time. When it comes to official ID, again, we are expanding into radio frequency or electronic identification. We've actually seen a interest from the USDA to move that direction. Currently, though, the program, there is no mandatory all animals have to be ID'd. I think that can be a bit confusing. There are certain classes, in particular in cattle, that are required to be identified if they move across state lines. And for our beef cattle, which is most of those that we have here in Oklahoma, that's going to be breeding cattle 18 months of age or older.
There is a cooperative effort between the USDA and the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture in this effort. Give us some information on that.
Absolutely. Oklahoma received 550,000 tags, electronic ID tags, to provide really free of charge. All you have to do is pay the shipping cost for those tags. Those tags are identified, are dedicated rather, to breeding animals. So he's looking to put those in replacement heifers and potential herd sires that are going to be in production for a number of years. And these tags, in particularly electronic ID tags, put us in a better position to respond if we were to have an incursion of foot and mouth disease, for instance. And we want to be able to identify that first animal and then launch into the plan after that.
This is kind of a complicated issue.
Absolutely. It's complicated. There's multiple factors that need to be considered when a producer takes a look at what traceability, what identification methods works for their operation. And it's really important that producers visit with their veterinarians to find out what is available and what makes sense for them.
Okay, great. And those tags, the best bet is to work with the Department of Ag, and they have some information on their website?
Absolutely. The Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food and Forestry, specifically the Animal Industry Division, they have information on their website. Folks can also call 405-522-6141 to get information via phone.
Great. Good talking with you. Thanks a lot. And for a link to the website that Dr. Biggs mentioned, just go to sunup.okstate.edu.
So behind me is a plant that's very beautiful, has lots of flowers, it's fragrant, but it's invasive and it can really cause problems around hay fields and also in especially in native grasslands. And this is a multiflora rose. This is an exotic rose from Europe. And while it does provide some wildlife value, it tends to really take over areas, especially areas that aren't getting burned very frequently. And it can become a real nuisance. So in the early summer, when you see this rose, this very large rose bush blooming, often it'll be in your fence rows, that's a good time to spray that plant. And triclopyr works great. Just make sure you cover most of the plant with the foliar application to kill it. But this is one that we recommend controlling because it can really become a nuisance, especially in eastern Oklahoma. And right beside it is another one, Bradford pear. But both of these plants need to be removed because they're going to quickly move out into this native hayfield behind us. So some of the issues that these plants cause when they invade native prairies is they simply convert them from a grassland to a dense thicket, or in the case of Bradford pear, a woodland. So they actually outcompete the grasses, and a lot of wildlife that need those grass species will stop using those fields.
That'll do it for us this week. A reminder, you can find us anytime online at sunup.okstate.edu, and also follow us on YouTube and social media. I'm Lyndall Stout, and this is Louie. From OSU's North Range, we want to wish you a great week, and we'll see you next time at Sunup.